want to tell you about the night everything I thought I knew about my marriage turned to ash. It was a Sunday. We had just come home from his parents' house, the same house we had been going to every Sunday for 9 years. And my husband, Daniel, was quiet on the drive home. He was always a little quiet after those dinners. I used to think it was just the drive. I used to think a lot of things. He went straight to bed without saying good night. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. I poured a glass of wine I didn't drink. And I thought about the look that had passed between Daniel and his mother at the dinner table. The kind of look that isn't meant for you. The kind you only catch by accident. And something in me, something I had been ignoring for a very long time, finally said, "You need to pay attention now." That was the beginning of the end. Or maybe it was the beginning of the truth. I'm still not sure which one it was. My name is Clara. I was married for 11 years to a man I genuinely loved. I want you to understand that before we go any further. This is not a story about a woman who missed all the signs. I saw some of them. I just trusted the wrong people to explain them away. Daniel and I met in our late 20s. He was warm, funny, the kind of person who remembered small details. Your coffee order, the name of your childhood dog, the birthday of your mother. He made you feel like the most important person in any room. And his family loved me. Or at least, that's what I believed. His mother, Patricia, hugged me at the door every Sunday. She pressed both my hands between hers when she greeted me. She remembered I liked the potatoes a certain way. She asked about my work, my friends, my health. She seemed to genuinely want me to be happy. His father, Gerald, was quieter, a big man who sat at the head of the table and laughed at the right moments and never said anything I could call unkind. His sister, Renee, became one of my closest friends. We texted every day for years. We went to each other's kids' birthday parties. I told her things I hadn't told anyone else. I want you to hold all of that. Because what I'm about to tell you will feel impossible unless you understand how real it all seemed. The first 3 years of our marriage were genuinely good. We bought a house. Daniel got a promotion. I started a small business that I poured myself into. We argued about normal things, money, time, whose turn it was to call the plumber. Not about anything that felt serious. Not about anything I would remember later as a warning. The Sunday dinners were the cornerstone of our week. Patricia made a roast every single time, without exception. We sat around the same table for 9 years. We passed the same dishes. We told variations of the same stories. And somewhere in all of that routine, I stopped paying close attention. I think that's what they counted on. The word "they" is doing a lot of work in this story. I'll explain it as we go. But I want you to understand something first. When a family decides they don't want you in it, really decides, as a unit, they don't announce it. They don't sit you down. They don't give you a chance to defend yourself. They work quietly. They work slowly. They work on the person who is supposed to be on your side. And by the time you figure out what's happening, the person standing next to you at the dinner table is no longer fully yours. That is what happened to my marriage. Not in one moment. In 1,000 small ones. Some of which I witnessed and didn't understand. Some of which I pieced together later from text messages I was never supposed to see. Some of which I only understood in full the night I stood up at his parents' anniversary dinner and told the entire family exactly what they had done to me. But we're not there yet. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to when I thought everything was fine. Because that's where this really starts. In the place where everything looks fine. The first thing I noticed was how tired Daniel became after phone calls with his mother. Not irritated. Not relieved. Tired. The kind of tired that settles in the jaw and doesn't go away for hours. He would hang up and sit on the edge of the couch with his hands on his knees and just be somewhere else for a while. I asked him once what they talked about. He said, nothing, just catching up. I believed him. I always believed him. That's the part that still sits heavy in my chest. Not that I was naive. I don't think I was naive. I think I was trusting. And I think trust, in the wrong environment, gets used against you. The second thing I noticed was that Daniel started having opinions about my business that he had never had before. Specific opinions. About my hours. About the money I was reinvesting. About whether I was spending too much time on work and not enough time. And this phrase, I remember it exactly. Not enough time being present. That phrase. Being present. I had never heard Daniel use those words before. It sounded like something someone had said to him. Something he was repeating. I didn't push on it. I filed it away. The third thing I noticed was the way Patricia started asking questions about our finances. Not directly. Patricia never did anything directly. She did it the way all skilled manipulators do, disguised as concern. She would say things like, "I just hope you two are being careful with money. Things are uncertain right now." Or she would ask if I'd thought about scaling back the business, just until things felt more stable. And then she would look at Daniel. Not at me. At Daniel. Like she was checking something. Like she was monitoring a variable. I noticed all three of these things. I just didn't put them together yet. That happened slowly. The way most important things do. The year our daughter was born, we'll call her Lily. She was our second. Things shifted in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. Lily was 3 months old. I was exhausted in the way that only new parents understand. Daniel was working long hours. Patricia offered to come and help. I was grateful. I want to be very clear about that. In that moment, I was genuinely grateful. She came on Tuesdays and Thursdays for about 2 months. She cooked. She held the baby. She was efficient and capable, and I felt like we were finally finding a rhythm as a family. And then I started noticing small things out of place. Papers on Daniel's desk rearranged. A drawer in our bedroom that was usually closed, left slightly open. Nothing dramatic. Nothing I could point to and say, "This is wrong." Just enough to make the back of my neck prickle. The thing that actually broke through was an accident. I had come home early from a doctor's appointment, nothing serious, a routine check, and Patricia was in the kitchen on her phone. She didn't hear me come in. I heard her say, clearly and without any uncertainty, "She's not right for him. She never was. We just need him to see it." I stood in the hallway for what felt like a full minute. I couldn't move. She said a few more things I couldn't make out. And then she said, "He'll listen to you, Gerald. He always does." She hung up. She called out, "Clara, is that you?" Like nothing had happened. Like the air hadn't just changed in every room of my house. I walked into the kitchen. I said, "Yes, it's me." She offered me tea. I sat down. I drank it. I didn't say anything about what I had heard. I know some of you are wondering why. I know some of you would have confronted her right then. Maybe you should have. Maybe I should have. But here is the thing about confronting someone who is skilled at manipulation. They don't break. They reframe. They make you feel like you misheard. They make you feel like you misunderstood. They make you feel like you are the problem for even raising it. I knew Patricia well enough to know that a confrontation in that moment would have given her more ammunition, not less. So I waited. I started paying attention differently. I started listening not just to what people said, but to the edges of what they said. The pauses, the glances, the things that were carefully not said around me. And once I started listening that way, I could not stop hearing it. At dinner one Sunday, Gerald mentioned, almost offhandedly, that a man from their church had gone through a difficult divorce but come out much better on the other side. He looked at Daniel when he said it. Not at me. Daniel stared at his plate. Renee changed the subject very quickly. I filed it away. 2 weeks later, Renee called me. We talked for over an hour, the way we always did. And she said something that lodged in me like a splinter. She said, "I just want you and Daniel to be happy, whatever that looks like." Whatever that looks like. That phrase. I've thought about it 1,000 times since. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a kindness either. It was a door being held open. A very particular kind of door. I didn't walk through it. Not yet. But I started to understand that there was a conversation happening in my marriage that I was not part of. A long, slow, coordinated conversation. And everyone at that Sunday dinner table was in it. Everyone except me. I need to tell you about the text messages. Because that's where the shape of everything finally became clear. Daniel had a habit of leaving his phone on the kitchen counter when he showered in the morning. He had always done this. For 11 years, I had never once looked at it. I want you to understand that. I am not the kind of person who goes through someone's phone. I had never done it before. I have not done it since. But one morning, about 4 months after I heard Patricia on the phone, I was standing in the kitchen making coffee, and his phone lit up with a message from his mother. And the preview on the screen was visible. It said, "Did you bring it up again? She needs to understand that she's holding you back." That was all I could see. That was enough. I picked up the phone. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I went back through weeks of messages between Daniel and Patricia. And I want to tell you, I am going to walk you through what I found carefully, because I think you need to understand not just what they said, but how they said it. Because the how is what tells you how long this had been planned. The messages went back over 2 years. 2 years. Patricia had been telling Daniel, in measured, careful, loving language, that I was wrong for him. Not in those exact words. Never in those exact words. She was too smart for that. She said things like, "I see how stressed you are. A partner should reduce your stress, not add to it." She said, "Your father and I just want you to be able to breathe." She said, "Have you thought about whether you want the same things? It's not too late to make a change." She said, "The children would adjust. Children are resilient." The children would adjust. Our children. She had already thought about our children. She had already rehearsed what would happen to them. And Daniel, my Daniel, the man who remembered everyone's birthday and made you feel like the most important person in any room, Daniel had not pushed back. Not once. Not in 2 years of messages. He had said things like, "I know." He had said, "You're probably right." He had said, "I just need more time." More time to do what he never said. More time to leave me. More time to convince himself. More time to wait for me to make a mistake large enough to justify what they had already decided. I don't know. I still don't know. I set the phone back down on the counter. I poured my coffee. I drove my kids to school. I came home. I sat down at the kitchen table where Patricia had drunk her tea and pretended she hadn't just said I was wrong for her son. And I let myself feel it. All of it. The grief of it. Because there is grief in this kind of betrayal that has nothing to do with anger. There's the grief of realizing the world was not what you thought it was. There's the grief of recalculating, of going back through years of moments and understanding them differently, of realizing that some of the kindness you received was performance, that some of the warmth was cover, that some of the friendship was intelligence gathering. Renee. The text I'd sent her for years. The things I'd told her about Daniel. About our arguments. About the moments I doubted us. She had known. She'd had a front row seat to everything I thought was private, and she had never once said, "I think you should know something." She had smiled at my children's birthday parties and eaten cake, and said she loved me like a sister. I thought about all of those messages I had sent her over the years. Every vulnerable thing I had said. Every uncertainty I had shared. And I understood now that those messages had almost certainly been shared. Passed around that family like a case file. Annotated. Used. I did not cry. I'm not sure why. Maybe I had already been doing a version of grieving without knowing it. Maybe some part of me had known for longer than I was willing to admit. What I felt instead was cold. Very still. Very cold. And something else. Something harder. Something that had no interest in forgiving anyone. Something that wanted them to know, not with tears, not with a private conversation, but in a way they could never take back or spin or reframe. Something that wanted a reckoning. And I had about 8 months until Gerald and Patricia's 40th anniversary party. A party that Daniel and I were hosting at our house. A party to which every member of that family had already RSVP'd. I had 8 months. I used every single one of them. I want to be careful here about what I tell you I did in those 8 months. Not because I'm ashamed. I'm not. But because I think context matters. Because I think you need to understand the difference between revenge that comes from rage and revenge that comes from clarity. What I did came from clarity. The first thing I did was find a therapist. Not because I was falling apart. Because I needed someone who could help me stay clear-headed while I figured out what was actually happening in my life. Her name was Dr. Yana. She was the best decision I made in that entire period. She helped me separate the grief from the strategy. She helped me understand what I actually wanted, not just what I wanted to take from them. And what I wanted, I realized over several sessions, was not simply revenge. I wanted out. Completely. Cleanly. With everything that was mine. And with everyone in that family finally knowing, in a setting they couldn't control, exactly who they had been. The second thing I did was consult a divorce attorney. I won't go into the specifics of what I learned, except to say this. I had built my business while married. I had financial standing. I had rights. I had been so focused on being a good wife, a present mother, a welcomed daughter-in-law, that I had never stopped to understand how much I had built. When my attorney walked me through it, I cried for the second and last time in that 8-month period. Not from sadness. From something closer to relief. I was going to be okay. No matter what happened, I was going to be okay. The third thing I did was start quietly collecting. Emails. Voicemails. I went back through years of joint accounts and found financial decisions that Daniel had made with his parents' input that I had not been told about. Money moved. Conversations I had been deliberately excluded from. I documented everything. I kept it on a drive that only I had access to. And I waited. I kept going to Sunday dinners. I kept drinking Patricia's tea. I kept hugging Gerald at the door. I kept texting Renee like nothing had changed. This part was harder than anything else. Looking someone in the face when you know what they've done to you. Smiling at a woman who had been engineering the end of your marriage for 2 years while she passed you the potatoes. I got very good at smiling. The night of the anniversary party arrived in April. 45 people. Gerald and Patricia's closest friends and family. Our house decorated with photographs, some of which I noticed with a particular kind of irony included me. There was a photo from our wedding on the display table. Patricia standing behind me, her hands on my shoulders, beaming. I looked at that photo more than once that evening. I thought, that is the most honest thing in this room. A photo of a woman using both hands to hold something in place. The evening went smoothly for about 2 hours. People ate. People drank. Daniel was attentive and charming. He was always charming at parties. It was one of the things I had loved about him. Renee pulled me into the kitchen to help with something and squeezed my hand and said I looked beautiful, and I thanked her. Around the 2-hour mark, Gerald stood up to make a toast. It was a good toast. He talked about 40 years of partnership, about what it meant to build a life with someone, about love that deepens rather than fades, about family. He said family was everything. He said they had raised their children to understand that. He raised his glass. Everyone raised theirs. And then I stood up. I don't think anyone expected that. I don't think I fully expected it either, in the sense that standing up felt less like a decision and more like something that was simply happening. I said, I'd like to add something if that's okay. People smiled. Some people already had champagne to their mouths. Daniel looked at me with something I can only describe as careful. Like he wasn't sure yet. Like he was waiting to see which version of me this was. I said, I've been part of this family for 11 years. I said, I came into it with a lot of love, and for a long time I believed that love was returned. There was a shift in the room. Patricia's smile stayed on her face, but something behind it changed. Gerald set down his glass. Renee made a small sound that I think was the beginning of my name. I said, about 8 months ago, I read a text message on my husband's phone, and it led me to 2 years of messages between Daniel and his mother. The room was very quiet. I said, 2 years of messages in which Patricia worked consistently and deliberately to end my marriage, in which she told my husband that I was holding him back, that I was wrong for him, that the children would adjust. I looked at Patricia when I said that. The children would adjust. She knew I had heard it. I watched her know it. I said, I also spent 8 months learning that financial decisions were made about our shared money without my knowledge or consent, that conversations were had, with Daniel's parents in the room, from which I was deliberately excluded. I said, I want Gerald and Patricia to know that I understand completely now. I understand what you built here, and I want you to know that I spent the last 8 months building something too. I set down my glass. I said, I filed for divorce 3 weeks ago. My attorney is very good, and every message, every financial record, every decision made without me is already documented. I looked at Renee. I said, I also want to say to Renee, I know what you shared. I know everything I told you in confidence went back to your mother. I want you to know that I forgive you, but I want you to also know that I know. Renee looked at her lap. That told me everything I needed it to tell me. I said, I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. I picked up my bag. I walked through my house. I walked out my front door. My children were at my mother's house. My attorney had already filed. My suitcases were already in my car. I had planned the exit as carefully as they had planned the slow erosion. The difference was, mine took 8 months. Theirs took 11 years. And mine worked. I have been asked many times since then if I regret it. If I regret standing up. If I regret saying it the way I said it, in a room full of people, on a night that was supposed to be a celebration. I think about it, honestly, every time someone asks. And every time, the answer is the same. No. Not one word of it. I want to tell you why. Not because I think public confrontations are always the right answer. I don't. I think for most situations they're not. I think they require a very specific set of circumstances. And those circumstances are when the people who wronged you have shown, over years, that private conversations with them are not possible. When they are skilled enough at reframing that any confrontation you bring will be turned around before it leaves the room. When they have a coordinated version of events they have been telling each other for so long that they actually believe it. In those circumstances, the only way to make something real is to make it witnessed. To take away the ability to reframe, to deny, to smooth over. To let people they respect and love see exactly who they are. That's why I did it the way I did it. Not for drama. For clarity. The divorce was final 14 months later. My attorney was, as I had promised, very good. The financial settlement reflected the business I had built, the years I had contributed, the decisions that had been made without me. Daniel did not fight it the way I think his parents advised him to. I think, in the end, some part of him understood. I think some part of him had known for longer than either of us could say out loud that what his family had been doing was wrong. Whether that absolved him of anything, I leave that to you. I don't have a clean answer for that part. I loved him. That's the part that doesn't fit neatly into a revenge story. He wasn't just a villain. He was a man who had grown up inside a system that required his allegiance, and who had chosen that allegiance over and over again, quietly, in small increments, until there was nothing left of the marriage that hadn't been touched by it. That makes him responsible. It also makes him a kind of victim. I hold both of those things. I don't forgive him for what happened, but I understand it in a way that doesn't require me to hate him. Patricia and Gerald did not speak to me after that evening. Not a word. Some of the guests reached out. A few of them said things that surprised me, that they had sensed something was wrong for a long time, that they were sorry, that they were glad I had spoken. One woman who had known Patricia for 30 years sent me a message that I still have on my phone. She said, "You were braver than I ever was. I should have said something years ago, too." I think about that message a lot. About all the people who are sitting in rooms where they can sense something is wrong and saying nothing. Waiting. Filing it away. Not yet ready. I understand that. I was that person too. For years. Renee tried to contact me twice. I did not respond. That door is closed. Not from anger. From self-preservation. Some connections, no matter how real they once felt, cannot survive what was done inside them. That's not dramatic. That's just honest. My children are doing well. They see Daniel on the schedule we agreed on. They are loved by both of their parents, separately, in homes that are now peaceful in ways that our shared home never fully was. I didn't understand, until I was on the other side, how much tension I had been living inside. How much energy I had been spending on feeling slightly wrong in a room that was supposed to be mine. I breathe differently now. I know that sounds small. It is not small. If you are listening to this and something in it sounds familiar, the quiet exhaustion after phone calls, the opinions that don't quite sound like your partner's own, the feeling of being monitored rather than welcomed, I am not telling you to do what I did. I am not telling you to stand up at the dinner table. What I am telling you is this. Pay attention. Trust the thing in you that says something is off. Don't wait until you have no other option before you start building one. Document what you can. Find someone you can trust who is outside the situation. Understand your rights, whatever your situation is. And know that the clarity you think you'll never reach, it does come. Slowly, and then all at once. This is Clara. And this is my story. If it helped you feel less alone, leave a comment. Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what hit hardest. I read everything. And if you know someone who is sitting quietly in a room where something is wrong, wondering if they're imagining it, share this with them. Sometimes, we just need to hear someone say out loud what we've been afraid to think. Thank you for staying with me this long. It means more than you know.